Welcome to our webinar on evaluation frameworks. My name is Julie Rodier, and I'm here with my colleague Kim Allaire, and we will be going through this webinar with you. So before we start, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we're on today. So while we are meeting on a virtual platform, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the lands, which we all call home. Kim and I are in the Ottawa area, and it is with gratitude and respect that we acknowledge that we are on the unceded traditional territories of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation. From coast to coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people who called this land home. Our acknowledgement of this truth is a small but important part in honoring and showing respect for the diverse histories and cultures of First Nation peoples in Canada. We also acknowledge colonial structures and the impact they have on all our work in the settlement area. So why are we talking to you about evaluation frameworks? We are from an organization called the Social Research and Demonstration Corporation, SRDC for short, and we are a not-for-profit research organization. Our mission has two parts. The first part is to help policymakers and practitioners identify policies and programs that improve the well-being of all Canadians, with a special concern for the effects on those in situation of disadvantage. And the second part of the mission is to raise the standards of evidence that are used in assessing these policies. SRDC works in a variety of topic areas: immigration and settlement, health, Francophone and Anglophone minority communities, skills development, people with disability, youth, K-12, post-secondary education, and many more. Most of our work is done in collaboration with organizations or governments to support their work, whether that's to test some programs through experimentation with a program and control groups, through policy research or program evaluation and performance measurement, knowledge mobilization and stakeholder engagement, or through building the capacity of organizations with things like data collection and measuring outcomes like we are doing today. So this webinar is part of the project called PROSPECTS. So this project stands for Propelling to Result-Oriented Strategies in Planning, Evaluation, and Continuous Transformation and Settlement. This is a project that's funded by IRCC for 3 years, so it's going until March 2028. The aim of the project is to support organizations who work with newcomers, both directly and indirectly, through evaluation capacity building activities. And as part of these activities, we have this workshop series where we aim to highlight and share best practices in evaluation and research. This is the second webinar in English in this series. The first one was on performance measurement, and you can find that information on our website. The key outcome of this project is really to enhance organizations' knowledge and skills in using evaluation. Other than this workshop series, there is also other components of prospects, such as our peer learning community and individualized supports, so where we work one-on-one with organizations to build their capacity in the way that they need. And there's a website, there's many other aspects of this project. So what are we going to do in the next 40 minutes or so? We're going to explore what is evaluation, just so we're all on the same page. We're going to explore why do an evaluation, what is an evaluation framework, and then we're going to go into each element of an evaluation framework and provide examples of work that we've done. And then we'll have a Q&A at the end. So the way that we define evaluation is as a systemic neutral data collection and analysis to monitor whether and how a program, initiative, or policy is working. So I mentioned performance measurement before. So performance measurement and evaluation are distinct, but they're part of the same continuum and they support each other. So I'll explore the table, the part that's on the left on evaluation. So evaluation is typically done periodically, whether it's at the beginning of a project to understand the needs, in the middle to see how things are going, or at the end of a project to assess effects. It's often done by neutral evaluators who work outside of the program. So whether that be external evaluators or someone internally who is responsible for that. The focus of evaluation is on explaining whether, why, and how a program or policy works, as well as what results can be attributed to the program itself. It's often useful to identify and to compare solutions to problems that were identified with the performance measurement. So if we use the analogy of a car, so performance measurement is like that car's dashboard. It informs us about the speed, the engine temperature, the fuel levels. Is there a light that is on? But for evaluation, it's looking under the hood of the car to explain or to see or to improve the performance. There are many reasons why we would want to do an evaluation. Here we're presenting reasons at the program level and at the organization level, if you were to do an evaluation at the organization level. So if we start at the program level, you might want to do an evaluation to improve services, to identify what is working well, what needs to be adjusted, or to make data-informed improvements to better meet the needs of your participants. It might also be to assess program effectiveness, so to determine whether the program is achieving its intended outcomes, whether that outcome is participants securing employment or organizations increasing their capacity to do work with a target population. You might also do an evaluation to support funding and sustainability. So to use evaluation results to justify continuing or increasing funding, or to present credible data to attract new partners or new funders. It might also be to inform decision-making by identifying whether the program should be expanded, revised, or discontinued. And it might also help to promote organizational learning by fostering a culture of reflection, inquiry, and continuous improvement. Now, if we look at the organization level, it might be to align programs with the mission and strategy. So to verify whether the organization's activities contribute to its mission and to identify gaps or duplication across programs. It might be to improve efficiency and resource use. So it might be to detect inefficiencies or obstacles within internal processes, or to optimize workflows or practices. It might also be to support organizational change. For example, using data to guide restructuring, expansion, or strategic shifts. And finally, it might be to promote long-term sustainability by using evaluation to align resources, programs, and structures to position the organization for the future. There's a lot of things that you can look at with evaluation. Here's a list of evaluation issues that you might want to explore with your evaluation. An evaluation can look at several of these at the same time. So for example, you might want to look at the coherence of the project. So is it aligned with, is there alignment between the different elements of an intervention? And is it aligned with the objectives that you're trying to reach? You might also do a conformity or a compliance evaluation. So that looks at the standards, the requirements, or the framework, and seeing if the program that you're putting in place aligns with that. You might also look at effects or outcomes, so to measure the effects of an intervention on the target population. You might also look at effectiveness, which assesses the extent to which an intervention achieves its intended objectives. You might look at efficiency. So that looks at the relationship between program outcomes and the resources that are used to produce them. You might look at governance. So reviewing the processes that are involved in planning, coordinating, and implementing activities. An evaluation can also look at implementation, so to see how the intervention was carried out. Or it might also look at relevance, so to look at whether the need that was behind the creation of the program still exists. So once you have figured out a little bit about why you want to do an evaluation and what you want to look at in the evaluation, now's the time to create an evaluation framework. And what is an evaluation framework? So here we describe it as a structured guide that outlines the why, so the context and objectives, what to evaluate, the key questions, indicators, how you're going to do it, so the design of the evaluation, the data collection methods and analysis, when to conduct the evaluation, and who to involve at what time in terms of reporting or knowledge dissemination. The evaluation framework is informed by the goals and the issues that are targeted by the evaluation. So what we just talked about in the last few slides. So these are the elements that we usually include in an evaluation framework. So describing the activities, so like the program or what you're looking at, identifying the objectives through a theory of change or a logic model, identifying some evaluation questions that you want to answer, determining the evaluation design, having a work plan for how you're going to do that evaluation, thinking about how you're going to collect the data, how you're going to do the analysis, how you're going to report, and who you're going to share the information with. And for each of these elements, we're going to go into examples. So in terms of describing activities, here's a table, but what you want to do is really have a clear understanding of what you're about to evaluate. So it might be to look at who is affected by this program, what's the problem that it's trying to change, what are the activities that are put in place to address the problem, what are the resources that are put into place, and what does that lead to in terms of immediate, intermediate, and long-term effects. Having that clear program description really helps to summarize the program that is being evaluated, and it really makes it clear so that the core components are illustrated and you can make decisions for the rest of the evaluation based on what is described here. Then you would look at what are the outcomes of this and to map it out to see what it looks like. So here's an example of a theory of change for projects that we're working on for Employment Pathways in Canada, Health Careers, EPIC HC, which is a program that's put in place by Achieve. So here you can see that we've mapped out the factors, structural, individual at the employer level. We've also mapped out some process factors, and we've laid out the outcomes, immediate and intermediate, for both participants and employers. And I'm not going to go into each one of these, but for example, for participants, an outcome that you're looking at for this program, you would expect that participants have an increased knowledge of the foreign credential recognition process at the immediate as an immediate outcome, and then as an intermediate outcome, they may have advanced in their foreign credential recognition process. For employers, at the immediate outcome level, we can see that we would expect them to have knowledge of the benefits of hiring internationally educated health professionals, and then as an intermediate outcome, providing those work placements or hiring internationally educated health professionals. So once you know you've really laid out the program, now's the time to define what evaluation questions your evaluation is going to answer. So the evaluation questions are the driving force of an evaluation. They're broad, they're overarching, and it really sets the tone for the rest of the evaluation. They're not the same as the questions that you would include in your data collection tools, such as surveys or focus groups. They're a lot broader than that. Evaluation questions are derived from your evaluation objectives and from the program's intended outcomes, which is why you need to have these clear at the outset. They also serve as a guide for data collection, analysis, and reporting. So like we were saying, the evaluation questions are really the backbone of your evaluation, and they will serve you to make decisions on these other components. They may already be prescribed by an existing evaluation framework. So for example, if you have a funder that is interested in one specific evaluation question, you can add that in to your set of evaluation questions. They're normally developed and agreed upon by all key stakeholders before the evaluation begins. And you don't need to have a lot of them. This really depends on the scope of the evaluation, but a simple evaluation could just have one question. And a more complex evaluation might have a few more with some sub-questions, but you don't need to have that many evaluation questions. And evaluation questions generally focus on these ones. And so for each of these, I'm going to give you example of what an evaluation question might be. The ones that I'm going to presenting are quite general, and you would need to contextualize them for what you want to do. And I'll provide an example at the program level and an example for an evaluation at the organization level. So in terms of the program's rationale, you might say, to what extent does the program meet the needs of the target population? And at the organization level, you could say, to what extent are the services offered by the organization aligned with its mission? If you're looking at the program's intended outcomes, then you might ask, to what extent is the program achieving its immediate and intermediate outcomes for participants? At the organization level, you might say, to what extent is the organization achieving the strategic results it has set for itself? If you're looking at implementation, you might say, was the program implemented as planned? And what is working well and what is working less well? And at an organizational level, you could say, to what extent do the organization's processes, structures, and systems support the effective implementation of programs and services? If you wanted to look at unintended outcomes, you could say, what unexpected outcomes have resulted from the program? And what, at the organization level, what unexpected outcomes have resulted from the organization's processes? If you were to look at the efficient use of resources, you might say, to what extent is the program using available resources efficiently to produce the expected results? And at an organization level, you might say, to what extent is the organization using its financial, human, and operational resources efficiently to achieve its strategic objectives? So as you can see, all these are quite broad and allows you to frame your evaluation. I'm gonna pass it on to Kim to take us through the remaining elements of an evaluation framework.
Thanks, Julie. So as Julie mentioned in those evaluation questions, they should include those stakeholders who are either affected by the program or involved in implementing the program. So the diagram that's on this slide comes from an evaluation framework for community health programs and was included in the evaluation framework to describe the key stakeholders. And this is important because they enter into many different aspects and elements of an evaluation framework, including those evaluation questions, but also in the design, reporting, dissemination, and throughout. And so it's important to take a moment initially to well identify who are the stakeholders of the program or the organization if you're doing an evaluation framework at the organizational level, and at what stages and where in the evaluation will they be included. And so, for example, it might be those affected by the program, and that might be participants for many programs, or in the EPIC HC example that Julie gave earlier, there were also employers who were expected to be impacted by the program. So those stakeholders, the employers, would also be included in that design of the evaluation, and it would be important to consider them and perhaps add evaluation questions related to employers. If you're creating an evaluation framework at the organizational level, those stakeholders might be the board of directors of the organization, the staff at the organization, and also community members, those you're serving, so clients. So it's often useful in the evaluation framework, or at least while you're working on one, to take a moment to indicate who are all the stakeholders, how are they being involved, and to make sure you're just not forgetting any stakeholder in the process. The next element in an evaluation framework that we include normally is that evaluation design. There are many different ways of including that um, in the evaluation framework. You can do it graphically, as is included here in this diagram. So we have a journey map of participants in that same EPIC HC program for internationally educated health professionals. You can also just describe it in text or in a table, but it's really how are we designing the evaluation of, in this example, a program. In conjunction with the services that are being offered to these participants. So they join a program, and then we're going to have to collect some data so that we can answer our evaluation questions. Where and how are we going to collect that data? And that's what's included in this figure. And here we've differentiated between the implementing organization, who are Achieve in orange, and us, SRDC, as the external evaluator in blue. We've differentiated between services that they're receiving and research activities, and just tried to put them all together so that we know as evaluators, but also staff at Achieve know and can tell clients when to expect different evaluation activities, and so that we've sort of pre-planned it from the beginning, where those activities and when they'll take place. Another example of an evaluation design is this one that was just in a table where we have the different types of data collection methods, the timing and frequency of that data collection method, and the source. So who is that data going to be collected from? And so we have a list of all of the data collection methods, timing, source, and it really, is very similar to the previous one, the diagram you've seen, just in table format, and it goes beyond the participant. So in this example, we can include data collection from an organization if we're collecting administrative data, maybe from employers if we're doing interviews with employers, community members, school boards, whoever is part of the data collection can be included in this diagram. On the next slide is another element that we include in an evaluation framework, which is our work plan. So this includes all the evaluation activities, their timelines, and associated deliverables. This just clarifies, again, very similar to the design, when different activities that are part of the evaluation will take place, what deliverables there will be, they're agreed upon. In our case, because we are an external evaluator with an implementing organization or a funder, and so we're all on the same page when we start the evaluation. It's also really important to inform whoever is going to be part of the evaluation from whom you're collecting data of these timelines. So if there's going to be a follow-up survey, that clients know to expect a follow-up survey, for example, or if staff will be interviewed as part of your evaluation of an organization, when will that take place, etc. So here we have the activities from a project called Carrière Santé that we are doing with La Société économique de l'Ontario. And it started with a launch meeting after we signed a contract with the organization. And then it goes into, our evaluation plan or evaluation framework. This project also includes literature review and environmental scan, which might be part of an evaluation that you might be conducting. And then we really go into the data collection, the development of data collection tools, the administration of that data collection, and then analysis and reporting, all with associated timelines. So the next element that should be described in detail in an evaluation framework is that data collection. So what data do you need to collect to answer your evaluation questions? And that is the data that you should be including in your evaluation framework as planned data collection. And we've noted here a best practice of only collecting the necessary data. So although many questions might be of interest to you, everyone's time who's either answering a survey or participating in an interview or focus group is valuable, and we only want to use the data, ask them for information for data that we're actually going to use. So we try and map back every question that we're asking to an evaluation question to make sure that it's actually necessary. So to make sure, firstly, that we are able to answer those evaluation questions, but also that we don't have any superfluous questions that we really don't need to ask necessarily. In this section of an evaluation framework, you would also want to specify how you're going to collect data and from whom. So we've given examples, I think both Julie and I, in this webinar already, of surveys, of administrative data, interviews, focus groups. You might have many different methods of data collection or only one, depending on the scope of your evaluation, but it should all be specified here from the outset. And when we say, specify things before you start the evaluation, we do believe this is extremely important, but we know that things change. So evaluation frameworks can be updated. If you realize you've forgotten an evaluation question, it doesn't mean that you should just, stick with what you have because that's what you said you would do. You can always add one. You can add data collection tools. The world changes. Things might change. And so these can always be updated, any element of an evaluation framework throughout. And the last part of the data collection piece that I want to emphasize is when this data will be collected. So do you need information before clients participate in a program or at the organizational level before you implement a big change at the organization so that you can have a comparison from before, and are you looking at changes? And that will really depend on your evaluation question. So is your evaluation question about changes in some outcome? And if so, how are you going to measure that change? Are you going to ask retrospective questions after someone's participated in a program? Or do you also want to have pre-program surveys or interviews or focus groups? So that's important to consider. Post surveys is another option, often for measuring outcomes, but you would have to determine when. How quickly do you think this program is going to impact clients, for example, and then determine when you can measure it. And this is also a function of, how long do you have funding for? If you have to do an evaluation of a program and you have 3 years for that, then the longest you might want to wait, depending on how cohorts are joining the program, is maybe 1 year, even if you think that it might take longer for someone to, find commensurate employment, for example. So there are ideals where you would want to measure when you would want to measure outcomes and what is realistic within the time frame of the funding that you have. And then there's a point in time survey. So no matter when someone joins a program, for example, you might want to measure everyone's outcomes on the same date. It might be easier to do that. There might be other reasons, depending on your evaluation question, why you might want to measure at a point in time. But those decisions should be kind of pre-planned and included in this evaluation framework. And then kind of linked to this data collection, we often find it really useful to include an outcome evaluation matrix. And what that does is it maps our evaluation questions to the data collection tools and even the specific indicators sometimes that we might want to include. So we make sure we're not missing any questions so that we can answer our evaluation questions, and so that we can refer to this when designing surveys or interview protocols, for example, or administrative data collection tools. So this is one example where we have a column for the evaluation question, and then some examples of indicators or measures for that specific evaluation question, and then the data sources. So where are we going to collect that data? So one of these questions, again, we're going back to that example of the EPIC HC program, is what is the profile of participants who join this program? And an example of indicators might be their gender, their age, their occupation. And then the question is, how are we gonna measure this? And we're gonna measure it in a baseline survey, a pre-survey with participants, and also using administrative data from Achieve, the implementing partner. And in the next slide, we have another example of a matrix, apologies, where it's even more specific. So we have the project objectives, the evaluation objectives, then the evaluation questions, and then the specific measurement indicators. And then within those measurement indicators, the methodologies that will be used. So very similar to the previous one with maybe even some more details. Um, and just again, making sure that you're collecting all the necessary data. We've just noted a few things to remember, keep an eye on in terms of data collection. We're not going to go into data collection in detail here. We'll have other webinars about data collection, but just as a preview, one thing to remember is to get consent from those from whom you're collecting data, whether or not that's staff, participants, employers, um, community members. They should understand why you're collecting data, how it's going to be used, how their security and anonymity will be protected. And so consent should be asked for from the beginning. One thing to keep an eye on also, especially with surveys, but this might be participation in focus groups or interviews as well, is response rates. So, how many of the people who you ask to complete a survey or join a focus group are actually completing the survey or joining the focus group? And that's really important for many, many reasons. But so that your results are reliable, they're representative of everyone who you're interested in, so who have joined the program, if it's an evaluation of a program, for example. And if those response rates are low, what are you going to do about it? And that can be included in your evaluation framework. So some mitigation strategies if you have low response rates, and that might be another topic of a webinar more specifically. Another thing to keep an eye on throughout the data collection, not just afterwards, is data quality and data cleaning. So look at the data as it comes in and check for data quality. Are people skipping one question or answering don't know to a question? Is that because your question isn't clear? You might have to change it, you know, etc. You might update interview protocols if something isn't working. So it's really important not just to wait till the end when you have all of your data already collected to start looking at it, because you can make adjustments and improve it throughout. And then one other thing to note is to keep copies of all your raw data, obviously securely, but don't make changes to that raw data. You always want your results to be reproducible. And so you can definitely make changes to the data, but keep a copy of that raw data and also of those changes. So now we've collected data. How is it going to be analyzed? We really advocate for an analysis plan from the outset that explains how you are going to analyze the data. Can be very, very detailed, step by step, how it will be analyzed. It might be less detailed, but it should indicate how you will analyze that data. It should be included in the evaluation framework so that it's clear. Here are my evaluation questions. Here's the data I'm collecting, and here's how the analysis from that data collected will answer those evaluation questions. And as I just mentioned, as with the data cleaning, keep records of the analysis so that your results are reproducible. We often advocate for mixed methods, so both quantitative and qualitative data collection. The examples we've mentioned have been interviews and focus groups, but also surveys and administrative data. They often complement one another. It really will depend on your evaluation questions and the scope of your evaluation. Some things to keep in mind for quantitative analysis, and again, we'll get into more details in other webinars, but is sample sizes. So if you have very few participants or staff members who are going to be participating in evaluation activities and data collection activities, that limits what you can analyze and how you can analyze it. So it's important to take that into consideration from the outset. Maybe you don't want to do a survey because you only expect to have 10 participants, and maybe therefore interviews or focus groups are a better method for collecting the information you need to answer those evaluation questions. Another slightly more technical note is about multiple hypothesis testing. As we said from the outset, you're trying to answer lots of evaluation questions. They're related, so you're testing multiple hypotheses. If you have limited data, that can be problematic. By limited data, I mean limited sample sizes. And so there are statistical methods to correct for that you should be aware of and take those into consideration. In terms of qualitative analysis, we've talked about interviews and focus groups, but who you actually ask to join an interview or focus group will really depend on those evaluation questions. Who do you want to target? Is there a specific group of participants or staff members or community members who you're interested in interviewing, and for what reason? So it will really depend on, again, the scope of the evaluation and those evaluation questions. And then now you've done the analysis and we're ready to present results. And so in that evaluation framework, you should include how you plan to report the findings, how you plan to keep the confidentiality of those who participate in data collection activities. You should think about and describe in the evaluation framework who the audience might be for those results. And you might have multiple different audiences and you might have different ways of reporting for different audiences. And so detailing all of that at the outset in your evaluation framework and then putting that in your work plan is definitely recommended. We've included a few ways that you might want to report here. There are definitely lots of different ways. We have another webinar up on our webpage about reporting that you can check out. You might produce a report that might be, 60 pages. You might transform that into a short 1 or 2 page briefing note that highlights the results. You might present results in an infographic or as a video or as a presentation. So lots of different ways of sharing results. And again, it goes back to who do you want to share them with? What's the best method for sharing results with that group of individuals? And what is the evaluation, the purpose of the evaluation? Excuse me. And here's one reporting example. This is just a briefing note from the Career Pathways for Racialized Newcomer Women project that SRDC implemented that ended a few years ago. The report was very, very long, and as a result, we transformed the primary results into a set of briefing notes that were much more digestible, easy to read. And so this is one example about employer engagement. And I think lastly, sharing and feedback. So in the evaluation framework, remember to specify who you share the findings with, how, and also when. We advocate for sharing back with those who participated in the data collection so that they can see how their data was used. So if it is with participants, sharing back the research findings, either the report or briefing note or presentation back with participants, with stakeholders that we identified earlier in our evaluation framework. That might be clients, staff, employers, other service providers. If you're, for example, an umbrella organization providing services to service providers and they're your clients, or just other service providers to highlight a program and suggest best practices, and you might present at a conference, for example. And part of that sharing back is to explain how you'll use those findings. So research and evaluation is only as useful as the changes that you make based on those results. If no change is made based on the findings, then perhaps it wasn't the most useful use of time and funds. And so that should be included in the evaluation framework. How will results be shared? And then how will those findings actually transform into change at your organization if there's change that's needed or recommended by the evaluation? And one important thing that we've mentioned, in the last slide, is collecting feedback of the findings, especially with those who provided information for that data collection. So if somebody, disagrees, this doesn't represent my findings, that's quite possible because they are one of probably many people who shared their results, but it's important to allow for the opportunity of people to provide feedback. And that might change some of your results. It might not, but to have that a two-way conversation and not just put out the results and leave them as that. So now the next slide, that was just an introduction. If there's more you'd like to know about evaluation frameworks, please let us know. The last slide that I'll put up will include our email address. You can send us an email. And as I mentioned earlier, we will have more webinars throughout the duration of Prospects, the project. And so we're going to look into logic models, incorporating evaluation in your work, quantitative data collection and analysis, qualitative data collection and analysis, gender-based analysis plus, and overcoming data collection challenges, such as low response rates to surveys, for example. So, please stay involved in prospects. If you have questions that we're not able to answer at the end of this webinar, you can join our LinkedIn group, where there's a QR code here if you have the LinkedIn app on your phone. If you don't, then you can use the link that's included there. You can also send us questions by email at immigration@srdc.org, and you can subscribe to our newsletter. The link is also there. To get regular updates about the project, upcoming webinars. Maybe if you're interested in signing up for individualized support, you can email us, or there'll be more information in our newsletter. So we hope you enjoyed this presentation and learned something new about evaluation frameworks from it. And we hope to hear from you more in the continuation of prospects. Thank
Thank
you.
you.